I don't know exactly the time period off the top of my head, but it's been quite a few years since we've seen Cruz last fight. Am I correct?
I think it's 4 years. Yeah.
Like 4 years since Dominic Cruz's last fight. So you have the 35-year-old coming here into the co-main event for Cejudo. Take me through this fight. What do you think about this? And do you think Cejudo will be able to retain the bantamweight title?
Sure. I'm a big Dominic Cruz fan. I'm gonna let that be known, but I'm gonna have my opinion be unbiased as possible. I just like his style of fight. I love his commentating. I love his intellectual knowledge of the ins and outs of deep rooted into MMA and how he's able to break that down. He's a guy who is all about not getting hit and then dishing out some damage. But don't be fooled by Henry Cejudo. The guy has a very gimmicky thing, triple C, he's all about it. But I think it's all a setup because when you're locked in the cage with him, he's all business. And you would be a fool not to take an Olympic gold medalist seriously and a guy with just that kind of pedigree. From what I've seen, I've watched the early UFC, not the embedded, but they break down the co-main event and the main event, and just learning a little bit more about Cejudo's background to complete what I already knew. I mean, it'd be hard to see even Dominic Cruz pulling this out, but I think the style makes for an exciting fight. I think that they're both good wrestlers. I don't know. I just think it's Cejudo's time, and that pains me to say it, but I just think it's Cejudo's time. I think he keeps the train rolling, and maybe when Dillashaw comes off his suspension, which he's off of now, but when he gets back to fighting, I think maybe we'll see that fight happen again at 135, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I agree with that assessment too. I think people underrate just how talented Henry Cejudo is. You mentioned it, Olympic gold medal and freestyle wrestling. I think he's the fourth recorded, acknowledged fighter to hold championships in two different weight classes in UFC. Mm-hmm. I think that's definitely an accomplishment of itself. He joins a name, Mr. Conor McGregor, who you know very, very well.
Yeah.
So the rest of the card is fairly solid. It's one of the best overall cards I've probably seen in at least a couple months, about a year in UFC. There are a lot of good fighters, right? So we're going to see Francis Ngannou on Saturday. We're going to see Jeremy Stevens and Calvin Kattar. We're going to see Greg Hardy on the main card, which should be interesting. Mm-hmm. We're going to see Donald Cerrone, Cowboy Cerrone, who lost to McGregor back in January, and fight Anthony Pettis for the second time. Fabricio Verdum, Uriah Hall, Ronaldo Souza. So of all the other fights we have going on right now, this could be on the main card or the preliminary card. Which fight are you most looking forward to and why?
Whoever's fighting Ngannou. I think we all come to see somebody nearly get decapitated, and he's the guy on the card who's capable of that. I remember when he first knocked out Overeem, it was just like a shock factor, and then you just wanted to rewatch it from every angle, which the UFC obliges and shows you every angle. And hearing Rogan and whoever's commentating with him go nuts, John Anik usually, but I think the Ngannou fight. But I'm also interested in the battle of I like watching Cowboy fight, and I think Anthony Pettis is always game. I think they're both a little bit past their primes, but I think when styles make fights, and I think that's a good one.
I have a question for both of you, and I'll let Joe Q go first here. Why doesn't Dana White call up Ronda Rousey and say, I'm going to give you an absolute gimme. I'm going to give you an atrocious fighter. Everyone's going to buy this pay-per-view. You're going to main event it. We're going to make a fortune. It could be your last fight. You go out on top. Or he could also say, hey, maybe we'll do you versus Holly Holm. Wouldn't that be big time? And this is the question for both of you really here, is do you see Ronda Rousey ever having a fight again in UFC? Joe Q first.
Okay, so let's start from the top. From what I've been reading and post Rousey leaving the UFC and going into the WWE, she's very happy there. She's obviously, everybody in WWE is very much still an athlete. Your body goes through a lot, but you don't get punched in the face per se. I think that, she had her time. She was a trailblazer. She's the reason that any of those girls that you mentioned have the name recognition and are able to fight on such a large scale. And Dana White was quoted a long time ago just saying that there would never be a woman fighting in the UFC and there would never be different weight classes of women fighting in the UFC. And I don't know. I think that Ronda is satisfied with where she's at and what she did for the sport. If I have no reason to come back. I don't have anything to prove to anybody. I think the way she went out is rough, and I get your question, because if it was me, I definitely want to get the loss back and end on top. Most fighters that you see, like Uriah Faber, is back fighting in the UFC. I mean, guys have trouble staying retired if they ended on a loss, especially, or they're still chasing gold. I think that they have a trouble staying put. But she's been at the top of the game. She was at the top of the game for so long, and then she just ran into a new breed of just striking. The game evolved, and I think it evolved past her abilities in terms of striking for sure. So I don't think that, and I'll close it out with this. I don't think that Ronda Rousey, being who she is and with the pedigree that she is, being an Olympian as well, would want to come back for a gimme fight. So I think that's off the table. I think the fans wouldn't buy it. Nobody would really buy it. And for her to come back and face Holly Holm, I see that as a no-win situation for her. She wants no parts of Amanda Nunes or anybody like that. So I don't think she fights again in the UFC. But I'm happy she did, because I'm happy. I'm a big fan of Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I'm a big fan of Michelle Waterson. I'm a big fan of Holly Holm. Big fan of I don't know how to say her name, but Zhang, the one who just fought Jędrzejczyk in that amazing fight. Big fan of her as well. So I'm glad Ronda Rousey did step in the octagon and trailblaze, but I don't think she has a reason to come back, and I don't think you'll see her in an octagon anytime soon.
And Joe C., what do you think?
I'm going to throw a shout out to Thug Rose, too. I love watching Rose Namajunas fight.
You're right.
I watched her and Joanna fight back in Brooklyn at the show that I went to, and that was one of the better fights I've ever seen. And that's two girls, and then Joanna obviously raised the bar again when she fought Zhang just a couple short months ago. So, but yeah, I agree with Joe Q. I think we've seen the last of Ronda in UFC. I think she's very, very happy in WWE. She's very content. I feel like at some point when you're an athlete like this and you're going 100 miles an hour for the better part of 10 to 15 years, and you're not really taking many breaks off in between, and you're training and you're doing all other media appearances and stuff like that, it definitely takes a huge toll on you. And I think for specifically a sport like mixed martial arts, it's the kind of sport where you need to dedicate yourself 24/7 to it in order to really maintain that level that you want to have in your mind. So, money talks. I feel like if Dana White were to ever throw an offer that Ronda absolutely couldn't refuse out there is a minimal possibility that maybe she does come back. I don't know if it would be to fight Holly Holm or Amanda Nunes, but it's certainly an option. It's certainly on the table out there. But yeah, so her last few fights, obviously she went out definitely not the way you would like to go out. But I think at this point of her life, she's pretty happy. I think she's grown a fan base in WWE, a significant fan base, probably one that's bigger than the one she had in UFC, believe it or not. And there are a lot more components to Ronda that now that we see. I don't know if you've ever gone to her Instagram or something, but she's a huge gamer. She likes having that lifestyle that she shares with her and her husband, Travis Brown. So
she was very good in the Entourage movie. Hopefully, they make another Entourage movie.
I watched it about a week ago. She was,
So Joe Q, I have a question for you. How come Ken Shamrock doesn't get the love and respect he deserves? Because without this guy, I don't even think UFC is where it is today, or even close, to be honest with you, because he was the pioneer of mixed martial arts.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely was one of the first guys in there when they were fighting bare knuckle and everybody had shoes on. You could 12-6 elbow. You could just stomp somebody out on the ground. You can kick them on the ground. No, I get it. I totally agree. He was definitely one of the pioneers. From my understanding, he had a pretty rocky relationship towards the end with Dana White, and Dana White doesn't think too highly of him. So I think that's why you don't see him come back like some of the guys like Matt Hughes and Chuck Liddell and Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonner as sort of ambassadors. You kind of just see them around the UFC under some capacity. Even Dan Hardy's got a gig, and he was George St. Pierre's biggest rival back in the day and things like that. But I don't know. I think that the guy tried to do some things that maybe weren't exactly his personality, and I guess some people just never forgave him for it. So. I enjoyed watching him and Tito fight, and those press conferences are hilarious. I mean, Some guys just aren't made to talk crap. And Ken Shamrock's one of them. Luke Rockhold is probably one of the toughest people for me to listen to talk crap to people. I don't know if the other Joe will feel the same. I think you can have a whole segment on the fact that Luke Rockhold should stick to modeling and not talk crap.
So Josie, Ken Shamrock, should he be in the UFC Hall of Fame? Should he be in the WWE Hall of Fame? And then when is Brock Lesnar going into the UFC Hall of Fame?
I think Ken Shamrock should be in both. He's absolutely 100% a pioneer, and his biggest issue is that he put the sport on the map before we saw a real blow up in the technological advances and the media advances that we see today. Back in the 90s, when everything was dominated on a smaller scale, on a cable TV scale, you couldn't really see UFC taking off because most of their events were geared to pay-per-view and to promoting big fights like we saw for years and years and years with boxing, as opposed to the WWF and later WWE, who was on TV once a week. Then they became prominent on TV twice a week. They were running pay-per-views and stuff. They had people who were more household names. The UFC, all their top fighters were only really, recognized like Ken Shamrock, and then later on Chuck Liddell, and so on and so forth. So I think it's just kind of a timing issue. But to go back to Ken Shamrock, I believe he should be in both Hall of Fames. He was a trailblazer for mixed martial arts and for the UFC, and he was one of the very first real crossover athletes that we saw succeed in the WWE, who could do it in that legitimate capacity and that made for like TV entertainment capacity. And to end it on with Brock Lesnar, obviously he's going to be the same as well. We know Lesnar, and he has a much decorated history background at Minnesota and freestyle and in wrestling. We know that he was a legitimate UFC heavyweight champion, and there's a good chance if he doesn't contract and unfortunately have to end his career early due to diverticulitis, that he could have probably had a much bigger and longer peak as UFC heavyweight champion. A lot of people forget that. So, I'm a yes for both. I think they're both Hall of Famers.
All right. Other than the obvious, like, McGregor, which UFC star right now, Josie, could walk into WWE tomorrow and make an impact? Like Ronda Rousey, walked in and automatically picked it up. We saw Cain Velasquez, and he was horrendous. So who would actually work?
That's a good question.
Would it be John Jones? Would it be Cormier on the mic for sure? John Jones, he'd probably fail a drug test. I don't know. I'm going to give you a name that you're probably not thinking of initially. I'm going to go with Israel Adesanya, simply because I think he has that dynamic that would work inside the ring in WWE. He's very dynamic. He's got a lot of personality to him. He thrives and he enjoys cutting pre-fight and post-fight promos in UFC. He likes and loves talking shit. So he's some guy who's still relatively young, who I feel like if he were to just decide to retire today, he's got the legitimate, belt, champion under his belt in UFC. And then the other guy would obviously be Colby, but again, Colby would have to be heel. Is where I think Israel would be a big time babyface if he were to ever go to WWE. I think Michael Bisping would be great in 205 Live, but that's just me. Joe Q, who do you think? Anybody you think would work in WWE very well from UFC?
Yeah, I've got two different guys. I think one, Jorge Masvidal would flourish easily.
Great name. Yep.
And then I think the guy we talked about earlier today, Henry Cejudo. Why not? The king of cringe. I think he can make it work. He's all about the props and Triple C. He's got the name. He's got the thing. I don't know if his size would play a factor, but I think he can make it work. But I think Jorge Masvidal and Cejudo for sure.
Jorge Masvidal would be like Razor Ramon.
Yeah. Or like an Eddie Guerrero.
Right, yeah.
And then you can make Cejudo the next Rey Mysterio.
Right. All right, Joe C. Any last thoughts here on anything that we discussed today?
I would like to wish Joe Q all the best. I hope it works out for you. chances are we're probably going to be stuck in